This week in journalism, we're going to specifically talk about broadcast journalism, so how to write stories for television news and radio news, and creating print advertisements, because that's also considered part of journalism. First, let's talk about broadcast journalism. In some ways, it's very different from print journalism, but in many ways, it is also the same. When it comes to broadcast journalism, you have only a minute to 3 minutes at most to get your story across to your listener and your viewer. Whereas in print journalism, you have the most space, as much space as your editor is willing to give you. One of the main differences is that broadcast journalists must be able to speak clearly. There have been broadcasters who've made a career out of broadcast journalism, even if they've had speech impediments. Barbara Walters is a great example of that. She was once told that she would never become a television broadcaster because she had trouble pronouncing her R's, and in fact she went on to have a very, very successful career. The key to broadcast journalism is to be able to communicate with the listener, and you have to be able to communicate clearly. You also have to have the ability to ad lib, especially in a circumstance where you may be reporting live. You won't be able to read from a teleprompter, and you're going to have to be able to communicate the story clearly without it written out word for word for you. Just as with print journalism, the lead is the most important part of the story, and it's just as important in broadcast journalism. In broadcast journalism, the lead is much like a headline in a newspaper. It's what you use to draw in your listener and keep them from changing the channel. It tells the audience what the story is going to be about. Here's some examples of good broadcast leads. The single feature lead, it emphasizes the most important part of the story, which is oftentimes the what element. Another type of lead is the several feature lead. It covers more than one of the 5 W's and H. For example, the school board ruled on 3 major issues last night. This kind of lead lets you know that we're talking about the school board and that there were 3 issues they ruled on, which is what you're going to find out about in the rest of the story. Another is the chronological lead, which tells the story in chronological order. So it starts at the beginning and tells you through to the end what happened. You should avoid question leads in broadcast journalism. They often confuse people, and when people get confused, they won't listen. You should also not start leads with a name. Oftentimes people are pulled into the story after the first couple words, and if you start with a name, people will often miss who you're talking about. So you should embed the name, if it's important, later in the lead or once you're starting to tell the story. Here are some tips for writing for broadcast, because people do write for especially professional news shows like Rock Center, The Today Show. There are broadcast journalists who write the scripts for those stories. The first thing is you want to be sure to attribute comments. The best attribution is says. Note that you use the present tense to make the story seem current. You want to avoid using direct quotes. It's difficult to use direct quotes in broadcast news writing because the listener cannot hear the quote marks. Instead, you should paraphrase and or use words like, if you're going to use a quote, you should say quoting her exactly. That way people know that you're quoting. You want to also write the story in your own words. Don't copy it from another source, such as the daily newspaper. Oftentimes, what you're reporting on the evening news will have also been written about in the day's newspaper. You want to make sure that you're reporting a fresh story and that you're not just reading what was printed. You want to keep your sentence short. You want to be brief and concise as you can. Remember that you probably only have a minute to 3 minutes to tell that story. You also want to eliminate most adjectives and adverbs. Time is of the essence in delivering a news story, especially when you have an entire world of news to cover in only what is typically a 30-minute newscast. You want to write the way you talk. Your writing should have a natural conversational flow. If you try to write too formally, it's going to come off very awkward. Don't be afraid to repeat words if it's necessary. Sometimes you might need to repeat words 2, 3, or more times. In newspapers and magazines, it's helpful to use synonyms as the reader has a chance to go back and reread a story. But in broadcasting, the listener does not have the opportunity to hear the story again. So you want to make sure that you repeat the most significant facts of the story toward the end, so listeners who missed them at the beginning can hear them again. There's nothing worse than catching the end of a news story and then having no idea what was going on. It is permissible to use us and our in news stories because the announcer is part of the community. So it is better to say our school taxes are going up than to say your school taxes are going up. You want to write in active voice. Just like printed news, you want to make sure that you're not using passive voice. When possible, you want to use phonetic spelling for difficult to pronounce words. This is obviously when you're writing the news copy, not when you're reading it. Isentropic is a difficult word to pronounce, and you don't want the newscaster to stumble over it as they're presenting the news. So you would write it out in the copy the way it is in parentheses, isentropic, so they know how to pronounce it. Writing numbers is especially difficult sometimes for broadcasting because numbers can be very long and they can trip people up. So writing numbers has its own set of rules. You want to write numbers so they can be read easily. You write out in words numbers 1 through 9 and number 11. So for 1, I would write O-N-E, not the number. You use numerals for 10 and 12 through 999 because these numbers are easy to recognize and they're easy to read. You want to use word number combinations for all others. So for instance, if I want the number 123,009, I would write 123-1009. That would be how I would write out a 123,009 for broadcast journalism. You want to spell out symbols. You want to write $149-, not $149. Makes it easier for the newscaster to read. You want to spell out words that deal with measurements or amounts. For instance, it's 73 yards, yards spelled out, not 73, the abbreviation for yards. Except for the word first, it is acceptable to use ST, ND, RD, and TH after numbers. First should always be written out FIRST. You want to round off numbers to make them easier to understand. If the exact number of people who showed up to a concert was 1,002, it's okay to say about 1,000 people showed up because that's an easy number to understand, especially when it's being spoken. When reporting times, avoid using AM and PM. Instead, use morning and afternoon. AM and PM gets confusing to both the newscaster and the person who's listening. Now I want to start talking a little bit about advertising because advertising is also an important part of not just journalism in high school and college, but also in the real world, and it's essential to many aspects of journalism. Few school publications could survive financially without advertising revenue. Especially in today's economy, there isn't a ton of money for publishing school newspapers, and it's expensive to publish school newspapers, which is why a lot of school newspapers have gone exclusively online. But in order to supplement any district money the newspaper might be getting, they go out and they get advertisers. Most school publications do not devote enough time to designing good ads that sell products. You want to go out and get community businesses to advertise in your newspaper, but that means you need to take the time to design good ads so that students see the ads, go to the places in the community and purchase things, and then that advertiser advertises again the next week or the next month. All right, so we want to make sure that we're spending time designing good advertisements. Layout and design of advertisements help readers to recognize and remember the business and the product. When an advertisement is written out well, you tend to remember what was there and who was selling it. I want to talk about some of the rules of advertising design because one of the assignments for you this week is to design some advertisements. One of the first things you need to do is to decide how much space is to be allotted to each part of the ad. So you need to have any illustrations, any copy, the address, what the product that's being sold is, and you need to kind of decide how much space you're going to have for all of that. You want to be sure that the ads have balance. However, they're not divided at a mathematical center. They're divided at the optical center, which is a point about 5/8 of the way up the ad, which the eye normally chooses as the center of a printed surface. You want to put the major part of the ad near the optical center and kind of build around that. So if you think about 2/3 up from the bottom of the advertisement is actually what you would consider the optical center, and that's where you want your most important piece of information. And then you want everything else around that. You want to arrange the elements to create eye movement. You want to guide the reader from one part of the ad to the next. That way they read all of the advertisement and they can see whether it was something they would be interested in. You want to make each ad distinctive. Do not design two fast food establishment ads to look alike. You want people to recognize that this advertisement is for this product or this service, whereas this one is for a different one. Keep ads simple and uncrowded. Some white space is absolutely necessary and is very appealing. When ads look fresh and clean, people are more likely to one, read them and two, remember them. You also want to use illustrations, either photographs or artwork. They add to the appeal of an ad, and most people are very visual. So if they see a picture of the product that's being sold, they're more likely to remember it. You also want to vary the type size for headlines, sublines, and body copy inside of an advertisement. You don't want your type to all be the same size because that means that there's no emphasis being placed on any part of the advertisement. So again, make the most important things the biggest, make the less important things smaller. And you want to make sure that you write copy that appeals to the reader. If possible, if it's a sale, say that the sale is for a limited time. Say that the price is special. Say that the supply is limited or that it's in to own the product. The main function of the copy is to get the reader to take action, go to that company and to purchase whatever they're advertising. So you want the copy to be appealing. There are 6 essential parts to every advertisement, and I want to talk just very briefly about each of those. The first is the sales pitch. This is the main body copy. This is what you're trying to get them to buy. The second is the headline. The main headline is maybe the company name. The second is minor headlines. These would be maybe what's being sold or a tag pitch for the company. The statistics. This would be the address, the phone number, the name of the business. Artwork or photographs. You want to make sure that you include these. And white space. White space is an essential part of the advertisement. It needs to be there. All parts should be included to sell a product or service. A reader will visit a place of business if its ad promises to satisfy a need. That is why the sales pitch is so important, to stress what need will be satisfied. Keep the copy brief and in sentence format. If a merchant advertises in more than one issue, try to change the sales pitch in each issue. The major headline, like any headline, should catch the reader's attention. It usually works best if it is a phrase. The minor headline may be a sentence. Sometimes the slogan of the business. It is permissible to use a different font than the one used in the main headline. However, be sure they complement each other. White space is important to make an ad appealing. Do not cramp copy and other elements inside a border. Give all elements breathing room. Keep the statistics near the bottom of the ad and vary the size and typeface of each statistic. The name of the business should be larger and bolder than the other statistics. Sometimes before you design an ad, it's important for the staff to conduct a survey to find out how much money students have to spend and what kind of things they normally buy, because that would give you some idea of what you should be highlighting in your advertisement. Here are some examples of some advertisements written, designed by students for student newspapers. You can see none of these are absolutely perfect, but they all include the elements that we're talking about, and they all have a lot of white space that really allows you to be able to completely read the advertisement. And here's some more. And here's your assignment for this week. 5 short questions for you to answer. Or for this direct instruction video, rather, not for the week. Please make sure that you answer all 5 of these questions in the submission box for this assignment as completely and accurately as possible in order to receive full credit. If you have any questions about this assignment or any other assignments for this week, please let me know and I'll be happy to help you. Have a great week.